Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that my opening statement be included as part of the record. Thank you. I thank the witnesses for being here. And if I can put some of your testimony into a budget context, since this is the Budget Committee. Some of the testimony today argues that further domestic development of fossil fuels would generate dramatic increases in government revenues and reduce the deficit. For example, in his testimony today, Mr. Larson projected that federal and state government revenues could increase to about $111 billion by 2020 with a pro-development strategy. But it seems to me that this projection fails to net out the costs associated with this strategy. The National Academy of Sciences estimated total non-climate change-related damages associated with energy consumption from fossil fuels at more than $120 billion annually, mostly derived from health and wellness issues caused by air pollution. In addition, the federal government spends billions of dollars to insure against risks associated with climate change, invest in mitigation, and provide disaster assistance to industries affected by carbon pollution-related damages. In the last year, we've also lost revenues from industries like agriculture, fisheries, and tourism in regions that have been devastated by the effects of climate change. So I'm wondering, Mr. Larson, if your forecast takes into account these very real costs associated with fossil fuel production, along with the potential increases in government revenues.
Thank you for the question. So first, let me just characterize the nature of our study was not pro-growth. It was on the current status quo of the current regulations as they stand today. So it was basically the development that we've currently seen today.
But my question is, in the calculations, do you take into account
in our calculations,
costs associated with this strategy?
We include in the calculations the regulatory costs associated with the underlying activity that's required to ensure that activity is done in a responsible
That's
fashion.
not my question. I'm not talking about the regulatory costs. I'm talking about the impact that we know from places like the National Science Academy, the costs on health, on public health.
So those are, yes, those are externalities. Those are not included in this. But the number let me just say, the number you cited only included the tax revenues. That did not include the GDP impacts or the other contributions from the industry.
So, Mr. Weiss, in your estimation, if we include healthcare costs, these externalities, the economic damages and the other externalities that I've just described, would increasing our reliance on oil and gas expand or reduce the federal budget deficit in the long term?
Well, I'd have to look at the numbers, but I think that certainly externalities need to be included. Interestingly enough, not including externalities, right now wind and solar power are cost competitive with new coal-fired or natural gas power. So the reason why there's a disparity is that the coal plants, which are very costly in terms of health damages, are 45 years old on average. They paid for their land, they paid for their facility. All they're paying for is their fuel and their labor. And so that's why there's this disparity in cost. But for new power, it's equal, not even including externalities. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, staying within the budget context, I'd like to talk for a moment about some of the benefits that we already provide the oil and gas industry. For example, after the first quarter of 2013, the big five oil companies are on pace to earn a combined $120.8 billion in profits. And as my colleague, Mr. Williams, said, I don't have any problem with people making profits, but according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, these same five companies pocket $2.4 billion in tax breaks every year. And I know, Mr. Durbin, many of your members are smaller companies. Would you say that this subsidy to the most profitable oil companies is the most effective use of taxpayer resources in order to promote your industry and your members?
I'm glad you asked the question because there are no subsidies. You know, that word keeps being used, but the companies involved, whether it's the big five, the big four, or everyone else
I call
here,
them tax breaks.
Well, you also use the word subsidies, but either way,
Let me answer your question.
Either way, these are provisions in the tax code that are available to all taxpayers, all average businesses. Even some of the legislation introduced earlier this year that was trying to trying to offset sequester, cuts by taking it out of some of the oil and gas industry. In each case, you had to look at where they went into the tax code, and whether it was Section 199, LIFO accounting, or the dual capacity provisions. Those are available to average taxpayers, average business. So it points out the fact that these are not special breaks for the oil and gas industry. These are widely available, and in the case of our member companies that are doing the natural gas production, the cost recovery is what is so critical to maintaining our ability to keep reinvesting in this country, creating those jobs, bringing cleaner energy.
Well, I'd like to close, Mr. Chairman, saying the Budget Committee is responsible for examining the impact of energy policy and it would have on a wide range of issues. And before we focus exclusively on expanding the fossil fuel industry, we should evaluate the real costs of carbon
Marilyn's
pollution,
time.
wasteful tax subsidies, and unused public
Marilyn's
land.
time's
Thanks.
expired.
Subsidy.